Namaskar, this is Akhilesh Bhargav. Welcome to Tit-Bits on Business and Finance with me. The global economy today is reeling under rising inflation, and all nations are battling it as their number one economic priority and policy. The surging inflation threatens to afflict national economies, with stagflation as being the best case scenario, as in the case of India, and recession being the worst case scenario, as is expected in the case of US today. Most nations today are facing decadal high prices which threaten their patchy recovery after the massive pandemic hit that they all took. While in India, retail inflation at 7.95% touched an 8-year high, and wholesale inflation of over 15% hit a 30-year high. On the other hand, in the case of the UK, inflation is at a 40-year high, and in the case of US, it is reportedly at its highest since 1982, with its current inflation at 7% being much above the US Fed target of 2%. The buildup of inflation has not been an overnight phenomenon, and numerous overseas factors have been fueling it, such that it is truly an imported inflation for countries like India. These factors that have fueled or pushed up inflation in the case of India also are: the first one, the trillions of dollars pumped in by the US Fed to support the US economy and prevent it from going into a recession because of the COVID lockdown and breakdowns, have resulted in humongous surplus low-cost funds sloshing in markets worldwide, which are heating up commodity prices by creating an artificial demand for them. The second factor, the ongoing Ukraine war, has disrupted global fuel and food supplies, which have boosted the prices of these items worldwide. And the third one, a resurgent COVID in China has triggered lockdowns there and has created global supply bottlenecks and shortages, which has again pushed up inflation. It has been these effects of surplus liquidity and supply shortages that have resulted in a never-ending surge in prices worldwide, and the surge continues. We have, of course, also been battling inflation in India as our top priority today. The battle against inflation in India has been spearheaded by the Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee so far, which is mandated to keep inflation within the band of 2 to 6% and to maintain it at an average of 4%. The main tools for inflation control by the MPC have been those of managing interest rates and controlling money supply in the economy. For this, the MPC needed to choose its priority between supporting the nascent growth versus battling inflation in the country, because these two, which is growth and battling inflation, have exactly opposite contradictory strategies. A monetary policy that supports growth requires low interest rates and surplus liquidity in the system, while the one that battles inflation requires higher interest rates and minimum liquidity in the system. They are both opposite to each other. The RBI MPC chose growth so far. The RBI MPC preferred to support growth so far by keeping the interest rates low and letting there be a surplus liquidity of almost 8 to 10 lakh crores in India's banking system. But with rising inflation now tormenting the poor and the middle class the most, and thus it becoming a politically uncomfortable issue for the ruling party, the MPC belatedly changed its monetary policy stance in May and shifted its priority from supporting growth to that of battling inflation. The MPC therefore increased the repo rates by 40 basis points in its unscheduled meeting of May 2022, and it also increased the CRR ratio to 4.5% in order to start mopping up excess unutilized cash in the system. With retail inflation touching almost 8% in April and with no hope that it would fall sharply in the near future, it was clear that the Reserve Bank's inflation estimate of 5.8% for financial year 2023 was way off the mark. Though it was evident that the MPC would continue to tighten liquidity and increase interest rates in its forthcoming meetings during the current financial year, it was clear that these monetary policy measures were not now potent enough for the Reserve Bank to single-handedly battle India's rising inflation. Its monetary policy initiatives in order to battle inflation was certainly at a dead end. It was certainly time, therefore, for the government to step in with fiscal measures to cool down prices, particularly those of food and fuel. It was also time to signal to the markets that the Reserve Bank was not alone in fighting inflation and that the government was also in it with fiscal measures. The fact is that we are experiencing a broad-based inflation today, and merely cutting fuel prices is not going to douse it. But then, fuel price cuts and subsidies is where the government had to make a start, not just for political reasons, but also for its fiscal strategy, and that's what it has done now. It was just about 3 weeks ago that the centre and the states were stubbornly bickering and sparring about who should initiate cuts in fuel taxes and fuel prices so as to begin the process of bringing down these prices which were directly hitting the common man. Thus, it was a bit of a surprise when the centre decided to bite the bullet and cut its share of fuel taxes recently by rupees 8 a litre for petrol and by rupees 6 a litre in the case of diesel, such that the retail prices at the pumps would come down by rupees 9.5 a litre in the case of petrol and rupees 7 a litre in the case of diesel. The government also announced a subsidy of rupees 200 per cooking gas cylinder for 90 million eligible families. It also announced a reduction in import duties on certain plastics and steel items. This cut in fuel tax is expected to cost the centre about rupees 1 lakh crores during the current financial year, and the cooking gas subsidy of rupees 200 per cylinder will aggregate to a bill of 6,100 crores for the centre, and both these are going to be solely borne by the centre only. The central government expects the state governments to follow suit, which if they do, then the price per litre of petrol and diesel can come down by as much as rupees 15 per litre, thus giving substantial relief to the common man. These fiscal measures to combat inflation have come after the government recently cut import duties on palm oil, soya bean oil and sunflower oil in order to bring down the prices of these essential commodities. With these tax cuts, together with the earlier increase in fertilizer subsidy by the government, the unbudgeted impact on the government's spending during the current financial year will be over rupees 2 lakh crores. At present, the government thinks and says that it will be able to absorb this hit to its finances during the current year without pruning its capital expenditure. But that to us is contingent on the government managing to collect taxes as it hopes to much more than its budgeted estimates of 27.6 lakh crores. It is also contingent on the government meeting its disinvestment target of rupees 65,000 crores during the year, which looks difficult today. It is also based and contingent on the Reserve Bank dividend being what it estimates it to be, and which it has not been so as per the recent announcement. And it also depends on the GDP growing at the projected rates, which with this kind of inflation and economic crisis, it will certainly not grow at the pace it is expected to. Experts at Nomura therefore think that there will be a fiscal slippage this year, such that the fiscal deficit will go up from the budget estimate of 6.4% to at least 6.8% during the current year as per the present situation. Others think that the government's capex will be pruned and that the government will inevitably have to borrow more money during the current financial year in order to meet its finances. To support the overall efforts to contain and tame inflation, the Reserve Bank will have to continue to increase the interest rates, and it will pull out more and more liquidity out of the system, which the Reserve Bank governor now says is a no-brainer. It is not ruled out at all. The consequences of these government measures and the emanating picture in the matter of the economy, in the matter of inflation control, is worth a discussion. The first issue, the impact of these fuel price cuts on inflation will at best be 20 to 40 basis points, which is certainly not much. That's because the inflation is not solely due to a price rise in a single commodity like, say, fuel or food, but it is across the board, and those items remain at a higher price rise. The second, the exact impact of such price cut on inflation and how long it will last is not clear, since there are too many other factors and ponderables which fuel the price rise, which is the Ukraine war, the expected recession in the US economy, the crude oil prices in international markets, the liquidity tightening and interest rate hikes, and the disruptions because of the Chinese lockdown. All these impact, and the interplay of these factors and their net impact on inflation cannot be predicted today. The third one, these measures do help to contain inflation expectations by signaling that the Reserve Bank and the government are united in their fight against it. The fourth one, these cuts are aimed at cooling down prices to bring household and business budgets from escalation into a better situation and to protect them, which they will achieve in a limited way. Further, there will be an improvement in the disposable incomes of household and the consumer, which could spur consumer spending, which is so badly needed for economic growth in the country. To us, it will help to reduce input costs, and the biggest beneficiaries will be the big corporates in particular. And finally, we think it is certainly a belated move since the fuel tax relief was long overdue. The reality is that we are battling an imported inflation, which is mainly fueled by factors, external factors beyond our control. It's a crisis that will last until the Ukraine war is over, until the global supply chains are not restored. Moreover, till the surplus liquidity is not withdrawn or put to productive use, economies will continue to suffer the ills of surplus liquidity. In this fight against inflation, the fuel tax cut is a small step, but then it is certainly a necessary and an important one, which we think was long overdue. This is Akhilesh Bhargav signing off till we meet again. Namaskar.